Kalispera from Athens, Kalimera in the United States. Welcome to another installment of our virtual lecture series. Tonight we gathered to explore the richness of the Greek language and its evolution over millennia. Tonight's event is a reunion with an old friend of CYA. Brian Joseph was a student at CYA in 1971-72. He took courses in advanced Greek. Maybe you remember that, Brian.
I do.
With H.D.F. Quito. He studied Greek with Korali Krokodilou, a close friend of Ismini Phil, and also took a tutorial on Linear B at CYA.
That's right.
Among other courses he took I think he took 10 courses here or something like that. His other accomplishments of those years was that he married Mary Clark, also a CYA alumna. I hope she's listening in today. Brian came back to CYA as a visiting lecturer in 1976. His devotion to linguistics and Greek highlights what CYA is all about. And he is a role model for our current students, for sure. In 1971-72, when Brian was a student at CYA, the school was nestled in the heart of Koloniki on Dinokratos Street, with courses conducted at rented space in the Hellenic American Union. It was a period marked by poor means, but by closeness in physical space and in the bonds formed among students and faculty. Those of you who were part of CYA during that era surely remember the unique charm of that period. Brian's talk today will be about the continuity and change across the history of the Greek language. I'm sure you have read his bio in today's invitation. Professor Joseph is a beacon in the field of linguistics, holding the esteemed titles of Distinguished University Professor of Linguistics and the Kenneth E. Naylor Professor of South Slavic Languages and Linguistics at Ohio State University. His academic journey, which started at Harvard, where he earned his PhD and enriched through a Killam postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Alberta, has been marked by a profound commitment to exploring language change, focusing on Greek linguistics. His election as a member of the American Philosophical Society in 2019 is a testament of his contribution to the field. I will only add here that Professor Brian Joseph is the leading historical linguist specializing in Balkan languages today. He's fluent in Greek and conversant with Albanian, as well as the Slavic family of languages. He has shown a lively appreciation of the relationship between linguistics and other disciplines, paying close attention to the social context of language change. In other words, Brian Joseph, or for Brian Joseph, language is a living cultural phenomenon that responds to social and cultural realities. His work, therefore, builds important bridges to other disciplines such as anthropology, history, and sociology. In preparing my comments today, I sought the help of another dear friend and CYA advisor, Harvard Professor Michael Hertzfeld, and with whom Brian co-authored an article in 1978. Michael informed me inter alia about Brian's work on sound symbolism, such as the general aura of foreignness or negativity, let's say, carried by Greek words that begin with T, Z, Z. And let me enlighten the atmosphere a little bit by saying that I was intrigued by this, and I looked up words starting with Z in the lexicon and the dictionary, and indeed found certainly negative aura. And those of you who know Greek will appreciate that in such words as Zaba, Zazaro, Zazoyeros, and Ziridzanzules. Among the many honors he has received are honorary doctorates from La Trobe University in Australia and doctorates from the Universities of Thessaloniki and Patras. Joining him in this discussion is Emeritus Professor Dr. Mark Janse, a renowned scholar in his own right, specializing in ancient and Asia Minor Greek, whose academic path has been equally distinguished from his foundational studies at Ghent University to his influential role as editor of Bibliographie Linguistique and his numerous visiting professorships and fellowships around the globe. Professor Janse's work has profoundly shaped our understanding of the history of the Greek language. He is honorary research professor in ancient and Asia Minor Greek at Ghent University and has held numerous teaching professorships at Ghent and at the University of Amsterdam, among others. His research covers the entire history of the Greek language from Homer to modern Greek dialects, with special interests in Homeric and Byzantine meter and versification, female speech, profane and obscene language, language variation and change, language contact and language death, and the medieval and modern Greek varieties of Asia Minor Greek. And on these topics, he has published and lectured extensively. Professor Janse is the leading authority in the study of Cappadocian Greek. So thank you all for joining us today. Please remember that this session is being recorded and will be preserved for future reference. Those who prefer not to be recorded, please switch off your cameras. And without further delay, I invite Professor Janse to take the floor and guide us through the process.
Thank you very much, both for the invitation and for the kind words in the introduction. It's really a great pleasure to serve as Brian's wingman for his lecture today. We go back a long time, work together, don't go back to his college year in Athens, but nevertheless, a very long time. We share an interest in the history of the Greek language from antiquity until modern day varieties. And we also collaborated on numerous projects. So it's really a pleasure to give the floor to Brian with the topic continuity and change across the history of the Greek language. Just by way of information for the practical side of the discussion, you can ask questions using the chat feature in Zoom. I will try to keep track of the questions and we'll introduce the introduction after Brian's lecture. Brian, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Alexei, for the invitation to speak in this very interesting and exciting lecture series. It would be hard for me to imagine 50 some odd years ago when I was a student in Athens studying, as you said, ancient Greek and with a variety of senior scholars, to imagine that 50 years later, I would be addressing the CYA alumni in this and others in this forum. So it's exciting for me to come home, as it were, in this way. So my topic is continuity and change across the history of the Greek language. This is a longstanding issue that has affected Greeks for forever almost. And we can see it in the stated in the work of the Byzantinists. Hang on just a sec. A bit of trouble here. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. So, and the issue is continuity between ancient Greece and modern Greece. It's a pervasive issue. The Byzantinist Eleni Glikatsi Arveiler noted that in 1998 that the problem of historical continuity of succession and of cultural heritage was posited quite squarely by and to the Greeks and after the period of national regeneration. So it's been an issue for many centuries, actually. And there's a language-related dimension to this continuity issue. Again, Glikatsi Arveiler noted that the intellectual pursuits and way of life of the Hellenes included knowledge and use of the Greek tongue as the prerequisite for participation in this intellectual society. The language would thus give someone access to Hellenikotita in general, and by extension would therefore guarantee some degree of cultural continuity shaped by language over the centuries. But there's also a more specifically linguistic side to the general language dimension to the continuity issue, actually involving sociolinguistics, or the sociology of language, and touching on a notion known as the ideology of language in the characterization by Michael Silverstein in 1979. And that is to say, as far as modern Greek is concerned, which form of the language, in modern terms, katharevousa or δημοτική, allows for the greatest continuity to Greek. Katharevousa, as you may know, was an invention of the 19th century, offering an enforced continuity, we can say, that was more or less artificially created through the conscious adoption of elements from classical Greek of about 2,500 years earlier. And that way it forged a continuity by building a bridge to the past, actually maybe an overpass, since it passed over the δημοτική. With the δημοτική, however, we can talk about an organic continuity that represents the natural development of spoken vernacular Greek as passed down from generation to generation over the some 2,500 years since classical times. And it thus gives continuity through the natural processes of language change over time. Now, this issue of continuity between ancient Greek and ancient Greece and modern Greek and modern Greece is actually a Hellenic-specific realization of a crucial general issue, since along with continuity, there is also change. How do we identify and make sense of continuity in the face of change, and of change in the face of continuity? And this is really what the time dimension in language, and if you think about it, in all of life and all human institutions for that matter, this is what it really means to think about the time dimension that we all experience. So with regard to language, what could or should continuity mean? Well, we could say that there are features and elements in a language that continue across time but undergo change. And in fact, if you think about it, a language at any synchronic layer is a number of features or elements, that is sounds, morphemes, words, and so forth, that are carried over from a previous stage, together with features and elements, sounds, morphemes, words, and so forth, that are innovative. And we can pick up on Glikatsi Arveiler's call to identify the features whose, as she put it, survival permits us to speak of continuity. But working within the historical linguist's perspective, since I am a historical linguist after all, that adds change into the mix. So what I propose to do here is to examine one linguistic feature that shows striking continuity across all of the recorded history of the Greek language, and that is the augment. It's an element that indeed gives evidence of remarkable continuity in the face of remarkable change, as you will see. The augment is a grammatical element that occurs at the left edge of a verb, realized as a prefix e before consonants, the so-called syllabic augment, but as lengthening of an initial vowel, the so-called temporal augment. And it's used with the imperfect tense, then the aorist tense, both past tenses. And less importantly, in terms of its frequency, it's used in the pluperfect as well. It's thus a marker of past time that is associated with the indicative mood. For early Greek, which is to say Mycenaean Greek, Homeric Greek, but also the poetry of Hesiod and Pindar, it's hard to talk about the augment without mentioning the apparent augmentless past tense forms, that is, past tense forms that look like regular past tense forms in every respect, except they lack the augment. The augment does occur in Mycenaean Greek in a form which is symbolized by ape doke, meaning he gave back, where the here is the augment. But mostly, though, in Mycenaean, to the extent that there are true simple past tense forms, there really are not very many, there is no augment. So in addition to apedoke, he gave back, we also find apudoke, an unaugmented form that corresponds to apedoke, We also have vide, which means he knew, would correspond to a Greek form vide, past tense without the augment. And tek, it's something that's written teke, meaning he placed, corresponding to ancient Greek teke, again, past tense form, but without the augment. And unaugmented past tense forms are also found in early Greek poetic usage in Homer, in Hesiod, and Pindar. To sum up then, for early Greek, we can say that the augment is mostly an obligatory marker of indicative past tense, except for Mycenaean and some variation in Homer as well. It's part of the morphological makeup of the past tense forms, the imperfect and the aorist especially. Whether it's realized as a prefix, the syllabic augment, or by initial vowel lengthening, the so-called temporal augment. And this situation continues into classical Greek, that is Greek of the mid-5th century BC, where from a purely formal standpoint, it's generally obligatory in past tense forms. Now, there are some exceptions besides the so-called gnomic aorist, which offers a functionally unusual augment in that the augment is there, but it does not refer to past time. But there are also various formal oddities about the augment. In particular, there are some legitimate past tense forms that are simply lacking the augment that occur in normal Attic prose, like elcheto for she or he wished, versus the augmented form eucheto from the verb elchomai to wish, or unaugmented herethein I found versus the augmented form herethein from herisko, defined. And there's some verbs that show no variation at all and have only unaugmented forms, such as utazo with the perfect utazan, I was stabbing, versus the expected autazan with the lengthened vowel showing the augment. Now, there may be a phonological basis to this having to do with some discomfort, let's say, with long diphthongs, but it is still an exception to the otherwise obligatory status of the augment. Now, there are some, in addition, there are some forms that have multiple augments. This was pointed out to me by Dr. Chiara Zanchi some years ago and got me thinking along these lines. She drew my attention to this form, enechomen, I endured, from anecho. Schweitzer suggests such forms are due to an uncertainty as to language sensibility. But there are also forms in which we see the analogical spread of the temporal augment, that is the lengthening of an initial vowel from vowel initial verbs to some consonant initial verb. So that's unexpected. So bulomai, to want, for instance, has a past tense form, e bulomein, I wanted, in place of the expected e bulomein. And it's probably, in this case, analogically affected by the roughly synonymous form a telon, I wanted, where the a is expected because the present tense form has an e in telo. In addition, there are some misplaced augments, which in a certain sense, some of them give a double augment. In the usual case, the augment is immediately to the left of the verbal root, and any other adverb-like prefixes, so-called preverbs, appear to the left of the augment. Moreover, in the usual case, the accent in past tense forms is retracted to the left, but does not go farther left than the augment. The augment is sort of like a fence that keeps the accent within it. So for kathidzo, to sit down, where the kat or kath is a preverb and the root is hids, we find the following. The etymologically correct kathidzon, I was sitting, where the long I shows augmentation by lengthening, and there's no accent retraction farther left than that augmentation. There's a reanalysis that gives kathidzon, which is accented as if the kath were part of the root, but and not a preverb, but we find augmentation only via the presumed long vowel kathidzon, kathidzon. Another reanalysis gives rise to a form with an overt augment, ekathidzon, which is regularized by the overt syllabic augment, the e, positioned as if kath was part of the root, and then the accentuation follows accordingly. So these are oddities. We can make sense of them, but they sort of stand out as, and show that the augment has some degree of grammatical peculiarity to it. We also find the verbal augment on a form that was originally a noun in the form echrein. It was necessary, where we also have chrein. And chrein is from a univerbation, that is a contraction of the noun chre, meaning necessity, and ein, the past tense of the verb to be, so was, where the a of ein actually contains an augment. And the root is the root s to be. Don't worry about the h's, it's just a linguistic frill, so to speak. So we have chrein as the older form with the augment built into that eta of the ein part of chrein. And the form echrein with overt augment shows the effects of taking the univerbation, the contraction, seriously, with moreover chre, a noun, taken as, that is to say, reanalyzed as if it were a verb, so that an augment is needed in the past tense, and accordingly is added. So this is an oddity from an etymological standpoint, the augment on an original noun. Now we're going to skip ahead 2,000 years into the later history of Greek, to the medieval Greek, and we find the augment in medieval Greek occurring, but at the same time it's absent where it would be expected. So we have agorasen, he bought, in the 14th century, where ancient Greek had agorasen. We find that the temporal augment, the lengthened form of the augment, has spread to places where it didn't occur in ancient Greek. So we have, for instance, bales, or bales, you did put, in the 15th, 16th centuries, where ancient Greek had bales with an e. We also find double augments. So pro edosa, gave up in the 14th century, where ancient Greek would have just had a single augment, pro edoka. And we also find external augments with prefixed verbs occurring. For instance, parakalesasin, they invited in the 15th century, where ancient Greek had parakalesan. And there are a few other innovative aspects of augmentation in Greek as well. Now, some of these innovations have deeper historical roots. So the ephera or ephera I brought, where ancient Greek had epheron, and we can find the E representing the long vowel in Southern Albania Greek that I'll mention below. It occurs as the aphera occurs as early as the 3rd or 4th century AD, that is post-classical, but not yet medieval Greek. But some of them are medieval innovations. And in either case, they demonstrate both continuity with the augment, but also a change in its realization. Now let's skip ahead another few centuries into the modern Greek situation and see what we find. The augment is still hanging on productively in modern Greek, and everywhere it occurs, it is still a prefix and still mostly e. In standard modern Greek, it is phonologically determined, occurring only when it is stressed. So ephera, I was carrying, but pherame, we were carrying. Continuing the ancient Greek epheron, epheromen, where both forms are augmented. In modern Greek, only in the standard language, the e only is there when it's accented, when it's stressed. There's greater realization for the augment in regional dialects, where it occurs even when it's unstressed. So it's found across the dialects with a different distribution. For instance, in the Greek of Southern Albania, we find unstressed augments, as was the case in ancient Greek, but is not the case in standard modern Greek. So we find, for instance, eskeftike, he thought, where standard modern Greek has simply skeftike. Eduleve, he was working, where the standard language has duleve. Espudazane, they were studying, standard language has spudazan or spudazane. And we can note also Cypriot Greek, ephelusamen, we were kissing, and other regional dialects show the augment as well. But there are also some irregularities or oddities. Again, these are linguistically interesting developments and they're found with the augment, as in ancient Greek, but even more so. And many of these are parallel to those seen in ancient Greek. So in one such oddity, we find the spread of the original temporal augment, now pronounced as E. For instance, this form that I mentioned from the Greek of Southern Albania, epheron, versus standard modern Greek epheron, they carried. We see interaction with preverbs in such a way that there's evidence for reanalysis and misplaced augments, misplaced from an etymological point of view, hence the scare quotes. So the preverbal prefix plus root is treated as a new root with the augment then outside of, that is to say, to the left of the preverb, unlike ancient Greek, where the augment was, as I mentioned earlier, inside of, that is to the right of the preverb. A form that shows this is admittedly a Katharevousa form that is a high style form, but it is widely used nonetheless. And that is eprokito, for it was a matter of, where we have the augment, preverb, and root plus ending, versus ancient Greek proketo from proeketo, where we have the order preverb, pro, augment, and then the root plus the ending. We also find verbs where what we could call a non-augment, that is to say, semantically and morphologically empty augment vowel occurring. These are original augments that are now embedded in verb forms as if they were part of the root. So, for instance, we have katevazo with the where the usual form of the preverb is kata with an a, and the usual form of the root is vazo. So the is from the augment in a past tense form like katevaza. Similarly, anaveno, to go up, where the usual form of the preverb is ana with alpha, and the usual form of the root verb is veno. The then in aneveno is from the augment in the past tense form such as anevika. We also find double augments in regional dialects. So we have, for instance, epira, I went, from earlier Greek, ancient Greek, hypega, where the a contains the temporal augment, and the hyp is a preverb, and this is the past tense of hypago, from the preverb hyp and the verb ago, meaning together, meaning to go. And the same is probably true for forms like epira, I took, but as it is from an earlier Greek form epiro with the preverb epi, then attested and non-standard forms like epira in the modern language could in principle be showing f from the preverb and not from the augment. But my suspicion is that it really is the augment, a double augment situation like epiga, but we really are clear about that in the form epiga. We also find in Cypriot Greek productive multiple augments with compound verbs. This is based on the work of Natalia Pavlou of the University of formerly at the University of Chicago, now at the University of Cyprus. For instance, the preverb or the composite element miso for half, combined together with psino, cook, gives a verb miso psino, to half cook something. The past tense, that is, I half cooked the dinner, we find emisopsisa, but also interestingly two augments, miso epsisa, with both of the parts of the compound getting an augment. We don't find miso epsisa, by the way. And with two prefix-like elements, we can find three augments, xana, para, epsisa. I overcooked it, para, epsisa. Para, epsisa, again, xana. So xana, para, epsisa. I overcooked it again. Now, it's interesting to compare the modern Greek situation with the augment to other modern Indo-European languages. This is by way of getting at an interesting detail to the time depth of the continuity here. In Armenian, for instance, we find the augment only on what would otherwise be a monosyllable, thus only in the third person singular form. And so we have eber, he carried, but beri, I carried, or berer, you carried. So only the third person would be a monosyllable. It gets the to have a disyllabic form in the singular of the past tense. In modern Iranian, for instance, in the Agnobi language, we find the augment as an obligatory part of the morphological makeup, the morphological structure of the verb. This is, as was the case in Proto-Indo-European and in ancient Greek especially, but the form is different with ah rather than reflecting an Indo-Iranian sound change of to ah. So what we see then is with the Greek augment is continuity and change all wrapped up in a single monophonematic, that is one sound only, monosyllabic, one syllable only prefix. The augment is therefore a powerful case study illustrating the tension between continuity and change, between stability and instability. And we can ask, is there continuity with the augment? And the answer is yes. Its form and function are more or less the same now as was the case in the deep past. Similarly, is there stability with the augment? Again, yes, especially in regional dialects today, where it is obligatory. Is there change with the augment? Well, yes, indeed. I've been spending the last 20 minutes with all sorts of examples of change in the augment. And finally, is there instability with the augment? Again, the answer is yes, because it's been subject to all kinds of reanalyses and changes. So by way of concluding, we can take stock of various lessons that we have learned from the preceding discussion that I've given you about the augment. Some concluding thoughts. First is that the augment was just a single vowel at the edge of a word, at the left edge of a word. It was often unaccented, and it was lost in most branches of the Indo-European family. Yes, it's there in some form in Yagnobi, in Iranian today, but and in some form in Armenian, but it was lost in all of the other branches, and yet we find it sort of hanging on in modern Greek today after so many centuries and millennia, really. So it would seem on the one hand to be a fragile and vulnerable element. It's at the edge of a word, it's often unaccented. Things happen to sounds at the edges of words typically, and yet the augment has survived. It persists in Greek over millennia, and it's still a key part of the Greek verb system today in the modern language. Now, linguistic, more lessons learned, linguistic continuity can indeed rest on a single feature, especially if it is a pervasive one like the augment. If you think about the number of times you use a past tense form in the course of conversation, you can realize that we'll find the augment in a large number of utterances on a regular basis and just in day-to-day conversation. Ideally, though, what we would want is to find is continuity, not just in a single feature, but in a number of features. We have to start, obviously, somewhere. So we start with looking at one feature, the augment. But it turns out that for Greek, accentuation looks like a promising domain in that regard to find continuity in the face of change. For instance, the limitation of accent placement to the last three syllables in a word, in the standard language at least, and the so-called enclitic adding of an extra accent in extended domains like I prosklisi, the invitation, I prosklisimu, my invitation. With when you extend the domain, you get an extra accent. That's an ancient Greek feature. It's found all throughout the history of Greek, and it's still very much alive in modern Greek. So accentuation gives us another domain in which we can see continuity in the face of change, and change in the face of continuity in Greek. Finally, as founder and director of the Ohio State University Laboratory for Greek Dialectology, which is where I am coming to you from, so to speak, you can. It's not a very exciting laboratory, but we do have various Greek projects going on here. I would like to point out one additional lesson that we have learned from the story of the Greek augment, and that is that the evidence from regional dialects really needs to be taken seriously. Regional dialects can, of course, be innovative in their own ways, but some of the signs of overt continuity that I've talked about are present in regional dialects and are not found in standard modern Greek. So the regional dialects are an important dimension to our understanding and our study of the Greek language. So polisas evcharisto, yavtitin efkeria. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I think I'm just about did it time-wise the way I should have.
It was perfect, Brian. It was really perfect, your timing and your lecture as well. Thank you so much for giving us a very interesting insight in a little element which nevertheless has augmented value in understanding the continuity and change in the history of the Greek language, which for a change is not, because this is something that is often the case when Greek lay people discuss continuity and change. In the case of Greek, it was not about the pronunciation, whether modern Greek is pronounced the same way as it was in ancient times, nor about etymology and whether Greek etymologies can be found in any English word, for example, with reference to a well-known movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, but about the augment. I was asked to introduce the discussion, and by way of introduction, I would like to add just a few examples from regional dialects which actually illustrate the main points of Brian's lecture, which was crystal clear, so maybe you don't need to be reminded of these main points, but let me nevertheless try to share my screen with you.
I know that you can't resist, Mark.
No, it's too difficult. Okay, so just a few examples to illustrate the main points of Brian's lecture, and also to give you some idea how the regional dialects can actually contribute to our understanding of continuity within the history of the Greek language. This is an example from an ancient Greek verb poieo, which is used still in medieval times, but has disappeared completely from modern Greek. We use kano to make. We find it in nouns, of course, but several dialects still have forms of this verb in the aorist and other tenses. For instance, Cappadocian Greek, one of my favorites, of course, has epika. And actually, I should start here. Sorry for this. I was not on the right slide. Here you see forms, the variation in late medieval Greek, where you have these variations in the aorist of evra, ivra, and leading up ultimately to vrika in modern Greek, where you can see that in Pontic Greek, for instance, the old forms have been preserved. You find both evra and ivra in Pontic Greek. This is a variation, as Brian showed us, which is very ancient. It is attested in classical Attic, for instance. In Cappadocian Greek, you only find ivra. If we go to the medial passive form, you find that evretin, which is the old passive aorist, is still preserved in Pontic Greek and also in Cappadocian Greek in the form evretha. So you don't have the suffix thika, which you find in modern Greek vrethika, I found, but you find an older form with active endings, but nevertheless, it's a very old form, and it has the augment, because in Pontic Greek, the augment is always used, even if it's unstressed. It's not just Pontic Greek, there are many regional dialects where the unstressed augment is preserved. In Cappadocian Greek, you only have the form without the augment, vretha, which shows you that a form like evretha or ivretha could be interpreted as having an augment, even though originally the a or e could be taken as part of the stem. Here's the verb poieo, pio in medieval Greek. You have the old aorist episa, which is preserved in Levisiot Greek. Levisiot is located here in the southwestern tip of Asia Minor, episa, and also in the imperative pc. Okay, so we both have the augment here, and a very old remnant of the ancient aorist with the s instead of the k, which was the innovation of medieval Greek, where you have epika, pika, and epika. Okay, in Chaconian Greek, which is spoken in the Peloponnese, you find very interesting forms like ebika with augment, I did or I made, also without the augment, pika, and from we even find forms which seem to be related to the present form like piu and the imperative pi, which is probably from the aorist pise. Then we have Pontic Greek, again, where you see epika as the aorist with the augment, but the imperative is very interestingly a sigmatic imperative. So you have pison, which is really the old imperative poieson, pison, and also pise, which is an innovation. But you see that here we find in the same verb, we find verbs with the older suffix s, the aorist suffix, and the Byzantine innovation, which had a kappa in it, like in epika. In Cappadocian Greek,
I think the slides aren't progressing, Mark.
can't you see this Cappadocian Greek now?
No. I think it's been stuck on the first slide.
You
Or an
don't,
early slide.
can you see anything changing?
No, no.
This is very, maybe I should try it this way. Can you see this Cappadocian Greek now?
Yeah, on the right-hand side.
You can see here, pika in Cappadocian Greek.
Yeah.
So here you see you have variations, epika with the augment, pika without the augment, and epka from epika, where the unstressed E is disappeared. So there's a lot of variation in these dialects. There's one dialect where the augment is not used in the aorist, but it reappears when you attach the negative. So pika is the indicative I didn't do it is then pika. So then you have to add the augment, which is really something very peculiar. Again, here you have from Dino, you have edoka and doka. And Brian, you were talking about the accentuation. Here you have the enclitic accent, edokato, but in the same dialect, you also find something like edokato without the enclitic accent, which is really, you find it in other dialects, but it's really something peculiar of Asian Minor Greek dialects as well. Pira, the same, you have epira, which is the original ancient form with the accent on the pir, but the innovation is epira with the accent on the as if it were the real augment, and that is really an innovation again. We have here in Cappadocian from Pharaoh, you have the forms that Brian alluded to, ephera, but also ifera, and if you add clitic pronouns, you get something like Iferan masto, they brought it to us, but also Iferan masto, with only the accent on the first syllable, which I've been told to many Greek ears sounds really odd. And then, and I'm concluding because it's not my lecture, if you talk about continuity and especially about archaisms in regional dialects, look at the aorist in Pontic Greek of the verb pharaoh, where you have ephera, which we found in ancient Greek and medieval Greek, etc., but also forms like inka and enka, which go back not to the Attic form enenka, but to the Ionic form eneka, which was pronounced enika, and then with the unstressed dropped enka. So here you see that there is continuity, not even from medieval Greek into regional dialects, but even from Ionic Greek into especially Pontic Greek, as you can see here. And Pontic Greek is also very famous for having these very long sequences when you attach clitic pronouns to it. So ephera I brought, but they brought it to us, ephera nemasato, with only one stress on the first syllable. So this is really an innovation of Pontic Greek and very un-Greek. Those were, I think, the main points and some extra illustrations of Brian's main points. And now I suggest we go to questions asked in the chat. Let me just add, Brian, that Cornelia says that Cretan also follows this pattern. I suppose she's referring to the augment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then a question from Lou Arenik, a layman's question. What about vocabulary generally? What proportion of ancient vocabulary will be understandable to a modern Greek? Brian,
Yeah.
that's a good question for you.
It's a very good question. There is, of course, a lot of continuity with in the vocabulary. Some of it is is not as obvious as it might seem, and some of it is a sort of pseudo continuity that we get with Katharevousa forms. So ancient Greek, and sometimes as well we see the evidence of continuity in the regional dialects. So in ancient Greek, a word like ophthalmos for eye, the body part eye, I mean, we have it in modern Greek. It's intelligible, but it's not the usual form. Rather, the usual word is mati, which is actually etymologically related to the of ophthalmos, but follows a very different kind of derivation. Yet we find in a regional dialect in the Greek of southern Italy, for instance, there's a form astarmi, which is actually corresponds almost exactly to ophthalmion, a diminutive of the ancient Greek form. So I can't give you any percentages, and to some degree it depends on the degree of education, or how much people were paying attention to ancient Greek class in elementary school and up through the Lyceum. And there are layers of modern Greek borrowings into modern Greek that are would not don't correspond to any ancient form. So there are a lot of Turkish words in modern Greek. Some of the z words that Alexei mentioned at the beginning that I've studied, many of them are from Turkish or from Slavic languages, so borrowings into Greek that have enriched the vocabulary but don't show any continuity with ancient Greek. So it's a complicated question, and all I could do is sort of sketch out some of the ways in which you might investigate that.
An additional question from Lewis: would a modern Greek understand the action and language of a play by Sophocles? I think
yeah, well, yes, no, that deals in part with a question that Mark touched on in his introduction, namely how was ancient Greek pronounced? The sort of standard view in modern Greek schooling is that ancient Greek was pronounced the same way as modern Greek. Most scholars adhere to a different viewpoint that suggests that ancient Greek was pronounced quite differently. The accent was a pitch accent instead of an intensity accent. A vowel like eta was pronounced e as pronounced e in modern Greek, but was an a or an a in ancient Greek. Even a word like ophthalmos, which I pronounce in the modern fashion, ophthalmos, in ancient Greek was not a f and th, but rather a p and t, ophthalmos, like that. So that would make it very hard if the play of Sophocles was pronounced in what scholars believe to be the style of ancient Greek. It would be very hard for a modern Greek speaker to follow. There are some words that are I call them lexical carryovers from ancient Greek. So a word like meli or honey is found in that form in ancient Greek and in modern Greek. The only difference is the realization of the accent. Meli in ancient Greek, but meli with an intensity accent in modern Greek. There are other questions I see.
Maybe I can add that it also works the other way around. When I first went to Epidavros to see an ancient Greek comedy, it was by Aristophanes, which was performed in modern Greek. I couldn't literally understand what they were saying, even though I knew the plot of the comedy. Only many years later, when I learned modern Greek, was I able to follow such a play. And even I would also like to add from my own experience, and I'm sure that this goes for Brian and all other learners of modern Greek who know ancient Greek, that it really, at the beginning, it's more like a hindrance, but at some point it becomes really helpful to see what ancient Greek word is behind a modern Greek word. I remember psilos, and I really had to imagine the written form of the word to understand it. It was from ipsilos, hypselos. To understand that it was really an ancient Greek word and not some kind of modern Greek invention. Okay, let's go back to the question, because there is one about the Balkan Sprachbund, Brian.
So
what is the level of influence on modern Greek from the Balkan Sprachbund? I know about the substitution of the infinitive form with na, but are there any other examples?
Yes, there are very many, and if I might be permitted a bit of self-promotion, a huge book that Victor Friedman at the University of Chicago and I have been working on for 20 years on the Balkan languages, with a lot of detail about Greek, will be published next year. It'll appear sometime next winter with Cambridge University Press, simply called The Balkan Languages. But yes, there's actually a great deal of influence, not just the infinitival development, but some details of phraseology, for instance, even down to shared proverbs, for instance, shared metaphors. Also, we find very interestingly in the Greek of in the north, we find that the middle voice form can be used with a pronoun in the verb in the third person singular. So it's as if it were modern Greek, mu trogete. It is eaten to me, or as far as I'm concerned, meaning I feel like eating. And that's a use of the middle voice form with the pronoun that is found in Albanian, in South Slavic, and in our Romanian, Vlahica. And in Greek, it is only found in the north, in an area in which those three languages are spoken as well. So sometimes there's a considerable amount of influence. We see issues in the syncretism of the genitive and dative, for instance, which began early in Greek in the Koine period, but it has been carried through even into the standard language with forms like the strong forms of the and weak forms of the personal pronouns, for instance. Emena is both accusative and genitive, for instance. Mas in the plural, genitive and accusative. So I don't know if that answers, but yes. And is it less pronounced in dialects further away from the Balkans, like Cypriot Greek? Yes, the answer is yes. There's about the Balkan character of Greek, and we see that in some of the survivals in the peripheral regional dialects of Greek, such as Southern Italy or the Greek of the area in northeastern Turkey, for instance.
There are several other questions. Maybe I should select two that have a more general significance, given the nature of our audience at this very moment. One of them has to do, Brian, you can choose, because we don't have much time.
Sure. Our other languages in which continuity is studied over a similar time period. Greek is actually...
The questions actually I had in mind is the question by Spiros Moskonas, which aspects of the modern Greek augment can be attributed to enforce and which the organic changed. This is a question to do, of course, with the nature of standard modern Greek and prescriptivism. And the other one has to do with pronunciation and what the basis is that scholars used to know that there was a difference in pronunciation. I'll let you choose which question to answer.
All right. Well, of course, I will. Let me just say about the question about the other languages with similar continuity. Greek is almost unique in having 3,500 years of history from Mycenaean Greek up to the modern period, and well documented for the most part. Chinese has a similar scope, but a very different sort of cultural perspective on issues of continuity. So Greek is really like a laboratory for historical linguistics in that regard. As for Spiros's question about organic and enforced change, I think I think you're right that prescriptivism does play a role. So the Katharevousa influence. I mean, the best example I could find of the interplay of the augment and preverbs was eprokito, which is a Katharevousa form, for instance. But I think this what we find in the standard language with the accented augment remaining and unaccented augments dropping off is a real is not a matter of prescriptivism, but is a sort of real organic development within Greek. And in some of the regional dialects, you can't really find, like, so in the Greek of southern Albania, you don't really find influence from Katharevousa in any way, shape, or form, and yet they have the unaccented augments like edhuleve. He or she was working. So I think in the regional dialects, maybe we would see even less influence from prescriptivism and more a matter of organic development.
It's 7 o'clock my
Yeah.
time, which means 8 o'clock Greek time. I think we should stop here to give the floor back to the conveners of this event. Brian, thank you again for your presentation. As always, it's a pleasure to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Brian, thank you very, very much for this very interesting discussion, and thank you, Mark, for your good work as a discussant. Let me just take one moment and try to take you away from the augment, Brian.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm sure you're an observer of the current state of the Greek language as spoken by Greeks today. And I'm sure you believe that language changes and language is a live thing, and therefore we have to accept things. Well, what do you think about the state of modern Greek spoken by particularly the Greek press? What do you think about the influx of anglicisms of words concerning the electronic world, which have no similarity with no
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I'm not a completely laissez-faire kind of linguist when it comes to such matters. I do believe that the speakers really are the ones who decide what works for them, so to speak. So if borrowing of English words is gives some possibilities for expressiveness and or naming items that would otherwise have a maybe more clumsy or awkward counterpart in Greek, why not? Languages I think can be enriched by such lexical borrowing. So that doesn't worry me so much. But at the same time, since I enjoy so much my understanding of the history of Greek, and as Mark himself said, being able to relate modern Greek words to ancient Greek forms is really kind of cool in a way, and gives you some insights into the way they've developed and so forth. I like the fact that we can reach back into the history of Greek and not that all new forms should adhere to some ancient Greek model, but it's nice that they can be understood. But for the most part, as I say, I'm kind of take a laissez-faire attitude with and let the speakers decide how they want to use their language.
Good. Wise words. Thank you very much, both. Let me just say 2 words about our next feature, and that's going to be the lecture next week. We are not going to take long. In other words, it's just going to be next Wednesday. We will welcome Jacob Moe and Caterina Valenza, who will delve into the fascinating world of maritime trades, with a particular focus on boat building traditions in Syros and the Cyclades in general. The title of their talk will be Crafts of the Sea, Boat Building, Fishing, and Seafaring in the Cyclades. And the discussion will highlight the craftsmanship and heritage of kaiki builders and address the significant challenges they face today. One of those challenges is the disheartening effects of European Union initiatives offering monetary incentives for the destruction of old wooden fishing boats, which will be a central theme of their presentation. Supposedly this is done, I think, to protect fisheries and so forth. But then again, plastic boats take the place of the old wooden boats built with such love and craftsmanship. An invitation for this lecture will go out later today, so you can register when you get it. Once again, thank you for your participation tonight, and we're looking forward to more events of this kind.
Great.
Well, good night.
Thank you so much.